Here's what we know. As an FBI agent, Ed FitzGerald helped, was involved in the task force in Illinois to send a Republican governor to prison who was convicted of corruption. He was part of that task force from the FBI. He came to Ohio, as you heard his background in native Ohio, and he came back to Ohio and was a prosecutor for several years, and was then elected mayor and then county executive. As county executive, he ended the old school patronage system that had such a corrupting influence on so many Cuyahoga residents and sent people to prison. He's got a track record. Unlike John Kasich, who surrounded himself with people who are not guided by a moral compass, but one rather that is focused on the money they can raise and have access to, and whether or not they can take advantage of what will remain of his year and a half left in office. These are two very different people, John Kasich and Ed FitzGerald. Very two different people, and those of us who are from northern Ohio, myself included, know that he ended the corruption that was so prevalent in Cuyahoga County for a generation. The former FBI agent who helped put a Republican governor in prison in Illinois, a former prosecutor. But those are my words. Steve Dettelbach, the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District, has pointed out, members of the Department of Justice have pointed out that what occurred in Cuyahoga County was isolated to people like Jimmy DeMore and Frank Russo, and thank goodness they're in prison.
I've got to cut it and push it out in the main room. We need to get the room right now. If we can just move it outside to keep going.
You're going to be so mean.
I know. I'm tired.
Yeah. I asked him the same question, but you yourself, you just came off a cycle where you were arguing vehemently that Ohio was going in the right direction, and now you're making the
President as you know, the president was and remains a stalwart supporter of the auto rescue, for instance, and the 800,000 jobs that are associated with the American automobile industry. You know the statistics because, Joe, I repeated them so often. I believe it was 80 out of 88 counties part of the supply chain network, and whether it's the big three, including Ford, or Honda, and the impact that those Ohio producers had and would have had if the auto rescue was not successful. John Kasich was as quiet as a church mouse when it came to protecting auto worker jobs. It was Ed FitzGerald who stood up literally in the shadows of the Parma facility and said, we have got to stand up for American automobile workers. In just the last month, 20,000 jobs lost in the state, leading the country. And John Kasich's spokesperson refers to that as a speed bump. Here's what we know. During the Great Recession, Ohio faced so many challenges, and it was the president, Sherrod Brown, and members of the Democratic delegation who stood up for auto workers, who stood up for investments through the stimulus package, through the Affordable Care Act, to ensure that health care was available to more of us, not less of us, fewer of us. John Kasich stood in the way every step of the way. And there's more work to be done. And the president has said that about Ohio and about the Midwest, about the country. And we recognize that the work that the president and Sherrod Brown and Marcy Kaptur and members of the delegation did to protect auto workers, in this case, will resonate, because it was allies like Ed FitzGerald that the president could depend on, certainly not John Kasich.
Sure.
Well, a lot has been made about the tax policy, the education policies. Governor Kasich has come out really strong in support of Medicaid expansion, which appeals to many Democrats. Are you afraid that could cut into some of the people who are on the fence of supporting a Democrat?
Well, the governor, as you know, introduced a budget that included some of the largest tax increases in history, from everything from the parking lot attendant to the dry cleaner to the kid who's going to mow your lawn. And the governor had to retreat from that proposal because he knew it was bad for small and medium-sized businesses. As Democrats, as those of us who care about expanding health care for more Ohioans, we understood and supported the Affordable Care Act. Now, John Kasich appears to be a convert to the Affordable Care Act, a newfound supporter of the president. Unlike Chris Littleton and Matt Mayer and others on the right, I'm going to welcome those converts, because oftentimes it's the converts who sit in the front pew. I'd encourage the governor not just to sit in that front pew, but to stand and join his voice. I'm also a member of the legislature. He needs 11 votes in the House. He needs 7 votes in the Senate to pass Medicaid. Are these just empty words when he says we should go kick shins and try and get votes? Because he hasn't kicked any shins in the Republican caucus. He spent just the last hour gushing about Keith Faber. Keith Faber, the very person on the very day who announced that he was stripping away Medicaid. You know, there's doing, there's saying. These are two different things. And the governor spent some time saying, you got to do a little more doing.
Chris, earlier today I asked Governor Kasich about the upcoming election on Friday of Matt Borges. I asked him if he knew about Mr. Borges' tax liens. He said he didn't know that. He proceeded to say that Mr. Borges had run his inaugural campaign and that everybody deserves a second chance. Are you cheering for Borges to become the new ORC chairman because it will be a factor next year, or is it a non-event?
Anytime my Republican friends are arguing amongst themselves, I tend to take a step back. I'm grateful that Kevin DeWine's no longer chairman of the Ohio Republican Party. I'm grateful that John Kasich has embraced Matt Borges. Why? Because it was Matt Borges who associated himself with Joe Dieters. He was convicted of a public corruption charge. He was convicted. He was somebody who with Joe Dieters, the state treasurer, that was ushered out of town literally in the dark of night. Joe Dieters fled to Hamilton County. I've read figures $600,000 in past taxes owed and $100,000 past taxes owed. I don't know where Matt got the $250,000 in the last 4 or 5 days to pay these liens. I'd remind him that that's income. If he did, he's got to pay taxes on it. I'd also remind those who are in and around this issue, we've stayed out, but I do recall the attacks on a member of the Strickland administration who had property liens. It was reported by some of you. And the Republican chairman at the time, Kevin DeWine, pointed out that a member of the administration should not serve if he owed property taxes, that it was a reflection of the governor. This governor views things much differently. Corruption charges and taxes owed. I'll let Governor Kasich defend those he wants to surround himself with, whether or not it's in public policy and transparency issues at Jobs Ohio and spending millions of dollars of public dollars in the dark of night, or surrounding himself with political cronies who frankly have been convicted, and those convictions speak more about John Kasich and where he's taken the state than I ever could.
What's the next step for Ed FitzGerald?
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
What, 17, 18 months?
It's 18 months. You know, we're going to travel the state. I know Ed has done so much of that already, and continue to talk about the issues that concern Ohioans, and whether or not we're going to continue to reward the wealthiest among us at the expense of regular middle-class people who live in towns like Westerville or Xenia or Sandusky. And Ed FitzGerald, somebody who knows the challenges that faced middle-income Ohioans, somebody with a law enforcement background, FBI agent, a prosecutor, somebody who understands you cannot accept nor surround yourself with people who are not above question. John Kasich has done all that.
Is there a timeline of when you might try to get a running mate or anything like that?
Well, that's
Far down the road.
Yeah.
And then I know this is a moot point, but is this for sure that Rich Cordray?
I can't speak for Rich. Rich is not permitted to speak about politics. I know this. Boy, middle-income families are really grateful to have his voice as head of the Consumer Finance Bureau, and I'm struck by the silence of Rob Portman, whether it was to close gun loopholes, whether it was to stand up for auto workers, and now whether or not he's going to stand up for big banks or stand shoulder to shoulder with fighters like Sherry Brown and Marcy Kaptur, Marcia Fudge, Joyce Beatty and Tim Ryan, and support Rich Cordray and the Consumer Finance Bureau.